I always thought that watching a son get married was like handing over a piece of your heart in trust. You imagine that after everything you've been through, the least you'd receive is respect, gratitude. But in my case, in the middle of the breakfast, I had prepared with so much love my son shouted in front of everyone that I wasn't in charge of anything anymore, that his wife was the one who made the decisions now, and that I had to leave my own house. And if you think I left crying with my head down, it's because you don't know who I am, because what I did next, nobody saw coming. Stay with me until the end, because this story takes a turn that even they couldn't stomach. But first, tell me something in the comments. Where are you watching this story from? And take a moment to subscribe to the Elderly Stories channel, because every week there's a real story that will shake your heart. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 71 years old and I was a seamstress for 40 years. I raised my son alone with every stitch I made, every dream I put aside. But that Sunday, I understood that loving isn't enough. You have to know when to stop sacrificing for those who only know how to take advantage. I woke up before the sun, as I almost always do. My body doesn't let me sleep much anymore, but something else was moving me that morning. I had a foolish need, or maybe not so foolish, to make my son feel that he still had a warm place to come back to. I put on the knitted sweater I love so much, the sky blue one with the loose buttons, and went down to the kitchen in silence. I opened the window to let in the fresh air, the kind that smells like wet grass and a distant bakery. I carefully placed the cups he used as a child, the ones that have no value to anyone else, but for me are like relics. I turned on the coffee maker, grated the cheese, cut the fruit. Everything made sense when I cooked for my family. Everything seemed lighter, more mine. While I was frying these pancakes, I heard Monica's footsteps coming down the stairs. She always drags her flip-flops with a listlessness that you can feel in the air. I greeted her with a smile she didn't return. She poured herself coffee without a word and stood in front of me as if she were measuring something or waiting for me to shrink. "Ma'am, I already told you you don't have to do this. This isn't your house anymore." She said it just like that without looking at me with that coldness only she knows how to use. But I didn't answer. I just nodded and kept cooking. Because you learn not to start fires when there's already enough smoke in the air. But inside my bones were trembling. I held onto the spoon as if it were an invisible cane. My son came in just as I was serving the bacon. He had his phone in his hand as always and didn't even look up as he passed. Monica went to him, whispered something in his ear, and then they went into the living room. You could barely hear it, but just enough. "Your mother doesn't understand boundaries." That's when my voice came out without thinking. "Am I such a bother for cooking and taking care of you?" The silence that followed broke my soul. Julian looked at me for the first time that morning, but not with tenderness, with exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion you don't know when you planted, but that suddenly blooms in your face like a thorn. The one who decides here is my wife, and if it bothers her, you leave. Just like that, he yelled it at me. No filter, no shame, not a shred of memory. He said it to me in my kitchen, in my house, in the house I built with every stitch and every tear. I didn't defend myself, I didn't cry, but inside something broke forever. It was as if the echo of that sentence kept bouncing off the walls, dragging years of swallowed silences with it. I turned to look at the table set with so much love, the bread still warm, the coffee untouched. No one ate it. No one said thank you. And I realized that I had lost him long before that shout. I went up the stairs with the dignity of someone who has nothing left to prove. Each step was heavy, but not from physical exhaustion. It was my soul that ached. In every picture hanging in the hallway, I saw pieces of a life that no longer belonged to me. The photo of Julian in his school uniform, his first birthday, the image of my late husband framed with black ribbon. I closed the bedroom door gently. I sat on the bed that had been mine for decades and took a deep breath. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was something else, like a mixture of sadness and dignity. I stared at my shoes for a while, wondering if I was really going to leave, if that's what he wanted, if Monica had won. But after all, who loses when you leave with your head held high? Isn't it sadder to stay where you're no longer wanted? I stood up, took the old suitcase from the closet, and started packing my things in silence. I folded my clothes calmly. I gathered my threads, my needles, my glasses. Everything fit in that suitcase except what was in my chest. There was no way to pack that. I looked out the window as I folded a blouse. Outside, the sky was clear, but inside me, a slow storm was raining. I remembered the Sundays when Julian would run through the garden with his shoes on the wrong feet, shouting that he wanted chocolate. I remembered when Monica first arrived, so sweet, so kind. When did everything go wrong? Was it my fault for staying too long, for giving without asking, for not setting boundaries in time? I swallowed those questions like I swallowed my pride, because you don't raise children expecting them to pay you back, but you don't expect them to throw you out either. I came downstairs with the suitcase in my hand. No one said anything. Monica was looking at her phone. Julian didn't even get up from the couch. I walked past them like a shadow. Not a mom, not a where are you going. Just the ticking of the clock like a silent witness to the scene. At the door, I paused for a moment. I thought about turning around, about saying something that would hurt them. But no, I just smiled. Not out of happiness, but out of pride. Because I didn't leave out of shame. I left out of dignity. And in that absolute silence, I took out my phone and dialed a number. My usual number. The bank's. The operator answered with a kind voice. I gave her my information. I asked to cancel the card, withdraw the funds, close the account. Do you wish to do this right now, ma'am? Yes, right now, this very instant. Because when someone kicks you out of their life without remorse, the least you can do is take everything that still belongs to you with you. I closed the door firmly. I didn't slam it. I didn't leave notes. I didn't make a scene. I just left. With my back straight and my soul full of things I no longer wanted to carry, I walked to the corner without looking back. And as the sun finally came out, I thought maybe this is the last time I'll grovel for love. And if it is, what a relief. My body had never felt so light, and at the same time so broken inside. As I walked with the suitcase in my hand, the pavement seemed to whisper beneath my feet. There's no going back now. I turned the corner without really knowing where I was going. I had no plan. I just knew I wasn't going back. Not after that. Not after that scream that threw me out of my own house as if I were a stranger. The morning air hit my face like a bucket of cold water. I sat on a bench next to the park we crossed so many times when Julian was a child. There, with the sun just rising and the city still yawning, I allowed myself to cry. But just a little. Just enough. What was necessary. Because crying too much is like giving more space to what has already taken everything. I took a cloth handkerchief from my purse, one of those I embroider myself when I have a little thread left over. I wiped my tears and spoke softly to myself. That's enough, Eleanor. That's enough. My head ached, but what was broken inside ached more. I thought about going to a friend's house, but I was embarrassed. Not out of pride, but out of shame. You don't go around telling people that your own son threw you out. It's not something you say out loud. It's one of those things you keep to yourself like a sack of stones that only you know how heavy it is. I took a deep breath, stood up, and called a taxi. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked me, and I, in a small voice, replied, "To somewhere nobody knows me." I ended up in a small motel near the city center. 4 cream-colored walls, a hard bed, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. But it was mine. For that night, it was my place. I opened the suitcase and sat on it. I didn't want to turn on the TV or check my phone. I just wanted silence. The kind of silence that doesn't hurt. The kind that feels like a warm blanket after so much emotional noise. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just lay on the bed with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand when my life had taken such a violent turn. Was it me? Was it them? Was it because I stayed where I was, no longer wanted? I spent the next morning walking. The city felt huge. I felt like no one saw me, that I could disappear and not a soul would notice. I walked until my feet ached. I saw shops, couples, families having breakfast together. And there, in front of a shop window, I saw my reflection. My hair was a mess. I had dark circles under my eyes. My eyes were dull. But also, there was something new, a firmness in my gaze. A spark. As if that mirror was telling me, they left you, yes, but you didn't break. And that was enough for me. That sustained me for the rest of the day. I went into a coffee shop that smelled like freshly baked bread. I ordered a coffee with milk and toast with butter. I sat by the window, and for the first time in a long time, I ate alone without feeling lonely. I watched people pass by. A man helping his wife get out of the car, a child running with his backpack open, and an elderly woman older than me with her cane, walking slowly, but with dignity. I thought if she can, I can too. If she doesn't give up, why should I? That idea stayed with me for the rest of the day, like a whisper, like a small engine. Before I left, I asked the waitress for a glass of water. She smiled at me. "Are you okay, ma'am?" she said. It almost made me cry, that simple human question. No one had asked me that in days. I told her yes, I was fine, and inside I wanted to believe it. I walked back to the motel with a firmer step, not out of bravery, but out of necessity. Because staying broken was not an option. Because if I didn't pick myself up, no one was going to do it for me. And because in the end, you have to learn to stand on your own, even if you've spent your whole life holding others up. That night, I lit a candle just like I did at home. Not out of habit, but so I wouldn't completely let go of my story. I closed my eyes and thought of my husband, how he would have defended me, how he would have said, "In this house, no one raises their voice to you, Eleanor." And yes, I cried, but this time with less anger, with more clarity, because I understood that sometimes dignity isn't recovered with shouts, but with well-chosen silences. Because leaving on time is also a way of keeping the best of yourself. The next morning, I made a decision. I couldn't stay there forever, nor could I go back. So I called a friend from my youth, Lucy, who had been living alone for years. I didn't tell her everything, but I told her I needed a fresh start. She opened her doors without asking questions. She offered me a room in a simple building near the Central Park. When I arrived, she hugged me so tightly that I broke inside. "You don't have to ask for permission here, Eleanor," she said. And that sentence was more powerful than any apology. Settled in my new space, I put my things away calmly. I arranged my threads, my books, an old photo of me with Julian as a child. I saw him so small, so happy, and my soul ached. But I also told myself, not everything was in vain. Because even though it hurts today, I know I raised him with love. And no one can take that away from me, not even him. From the window you can see the town square, and in the afternoons I hear a violinist who plays old love songs. That sound has become part of my healing, as if each note reminds me that there is still beauty, even in the ruins. I got up early as always, but this time not to serve anyone. This time I made coffee just for myself. I sat down to drink it slowly, watching the morning light come through the blinds, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Not fulfilled, not happy, but at peace, which sometimes for a woman like me is already a lot. A whole lot. Because after everything I've lived through, learning to be alone without feeling empty, that's almost a miracle. And that miracle, I gave it to myself. 2 days after I left, the phone rang. It wasn't Julian. Of course not. It was the bank. The same operator who had helped me before called to confirm the account closure. "Everything has been processed, Mrs. Vance. The total amount has been transferred to your new personal account." Her voice was kind, almost motherly, as if she sensed that what I was doing wasn't just a transaction, but a severance. I hung up and sat at the table looking at my empty cup. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel guilt. I felt a strange peace, like when you clean out a closet and can finally close the door without things falling on top of you. I stayed like that for a good while, breathing. Not celebrating, just breathing. Because there are decisions you don't make for revenge, but to heal. I remembered all the times Julian used that money without knowing it came from me. Online shopping, the groceries, the vacations he said were cheap, the new refrigerator he was supposedly offered with no interest payments. I would smile silently, knowing I was helping him, even though he never asked where the balance came from. Maybe in his head, the money just grew on its own. Maybe he thought he would always have that safety net. But the truth is, it was never his. It was never theirs. It was mine. It was the fruit of years of sewing, of extra jobs, of saving coins in jars, and not buying things I really needed. It was my safety net, the one I lent him, no strings attached. Until he threw me out. I didn't know what happened exactly that day, but Lucy, who always finds out everything, told me that Julian went to the supermarket with Monica and his card was declined 3 times, and that they argued in front of everyone. I wasn't there, but I imagined it in detail. I saw the scene in my head like a silent movie. Monica, with an uncomfortable look on her face. Julian checking the balance on his phone over and over, not understanding anything. The cashier waiting. The people in line murmuring. And that feeling you only know when something you took for granted is suddenly taken away. I imagined it, and I didn't laugh. I just closed my eyes and thought, it's about time you felt what it's like to have no backup. Lucy arrived that afternoon with pastries and her desire to chat. She has always been a cheerful woman, but when she saw me that time, she lowered her tone. "Are you okay?" she said. I told her I was, that I finally felt like the ground wasn't moving under my feet anymore. She looked at me in silence. Then she took my hand. "Don't feel bad, Eleanor. Helping is fine, but letting them walk all over you, that's something else." Her words caressed me like a soft blanket. I saw myself in her eyes and thought, how many women like me have stayed silent for too long? How many have put bread on a table that no longer belongs to them? That night I dreamed of Julian. I dreamed he was a child again, asking me for milk before bed and hugging me tight when he had nightmares. I woke up with a tight chest and a damp pillow. I sat up in bed and looked at the ceiling. I wanted to text him. I wanted to call him, but I didn't, because I understood that it's one thing to miss someone and another thing entirely to beg someone who has already denied you. I made coffee and went out onto the balcony. The air was warm, and a guitar was playing in the square. I leaned on the railing and said to myself in a soft voice, "You're doing well, Eleanor. You're doing well." That same day, I checked my email and saw an automated message. "Failed debit attempt, card canceled." I smiled not out of malice, but out of confirmation, because things finally were falling into place. I poured myself a bowl of oatmeal and sat at the table to eat slowly. I saw the milk carton and chuckled softly. Because for years, that same carton was bought with my card, because I even paid for their breakfast. And there I understood it wasn't about the money. It was about who was holding who up. In the afternoon, Lucy suggested I go with her to the market. We walked among the stalls of flowers, fruits, and crafts. She helped me choose a pot for the balcony. "You have to fill your space with living things," she said. I chose a plant with large green leaves. I don't know why, but I felt like giving it a name. I called it Teresa, like my mother. I felt something take root in me as I placed it by the window, as if I finally understood that you also have the right to inhabit, not just to serve. At night when the phone vibrated, I knew it was him. "John." I didn't answer. I didn't open the message. I just watched it glow on the screen for a while until it went dark on its own. I got into bed with a book in my hands, but I didn't read. I kept thinking about everything I had allowed for love, about how much I gave without asking, and how little I received in return. It hurt, yes, but it also made me stronger, because that silence, that not answering, was louder than any shout I could have given. I closed my eyes and made myself a promise that everything I did from now on would be for me, that the next carton of milk I buy will be for me and for whoever looks at me with respect, that if I invite someone to my table again, it will be because they deserve it, because I understood that you're not selfish for setting limits. You're brave, you're wise, and I'm just beginning to discover how much I had forgotten myself. The first night was hard, not because of the hard bed or the heat, but because of the silence, a silence so different from the one in Julian's house. There it was, a heavy silence, full of unsaid things, of restrained steps and doors closed, with more force than necessary. Here instead, the silence was clean. It let me breathe. It let me think without fear. I lay down, looking at the ceiling, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Not completely happy. No, but free. And that freedom, though lonely, had something sacred about it, like when you sit on a bench in the sun and no one asks anything of you, like when you can breathe without guilt. Lucy let me arrange my things at my own pace. On a shelf, I put my fabric scraps, my scissors, my favorite needles. On the wall, I hung a small picture of St. Jude that has been with me since Julian was a baby. Not because I'm strictly devout, but because that little picture reminds me of who I was, a woman who believed, who hoped, who endured. From the window, I could see the trees in the square. Some children were running, a dog was barking in the distance, and a vendor was shouting in a raspy voice that he had tamales. I liked that. It made me feel like the world was still spinning, even though mine had shifted on its axis. The nights were slow. I would make myself a chamomile tea, arrange the pillows, and read a few pages of a book I had bought at a magazine stand. But most of the time, I didn't get past 3 pages, because my mind would wander to memories, to scenes, to words I didn't know how to answer. Images of little Julian would come to my mind, crying with a fever, sleeping on top of me, saying, "Mommy, stay." And then the contrast, that cold shout, that expulsion. I would ask myself, like someone picking at a wound, how do you get from one thing to the other? How do you forget so much love so easily? One afternoon, while I was sewing a handkerchief with light blue thread, Lucy brought me a box of fabric she had found in her attic. There was everything linen cotton, old lace ribbons stored in yellowish bags. I felt an excitement I didn't expect. I knelt in front of the box like a child in front of her toys. "Do whatever you want with all this," she said. And there among those forgotten pieces of fabric, I felt that something in me was also being mended. Because sometimes you don't need much. It's enough for someone to look at you and say, "Do whatever you want." That night, I dreamed of my granddaughter. I dreamed she took my hand and told me she was cold. I woke up with a lump in my chest. I missed her, more than I allowed myself to admit. The last time I saw her was on her birthday. I gave her a backpack that I embroidered myself. Monica barely let her open the gift. Julian looked uncomfortable. She hugged me quietly, secretly, and in her eyes there was something, as if she knew more than she was saying, as if she was also learning to be silent inside. I wondered if she was okay, if she was eating, if she still loved me. That doubt haunted me all day. I didn't want to call. I didn't want to bother. But the heart doesn't calm down so easily. I sat on the bed, hugged a pillow, and stayed there in that warm space, trying to convince myself that I did the right thing. Because sometimes you leave to save yourself, but that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. I dreamed of her again. This time she was running towards me with a drawing in her hand. I woke up with tears in my eyes. And at noon, as if the universe had heard my sleeplessness, the phone rang. It was her, my granddaughter. Her voice was trembling. She was crying. "Grandma, my parents aren't talking to each other anymore. They're yelling, 'I don't want to be here. My stomach hurts. Everything hurts.'" I felt like I was being stabbed. I sat up straight and took a deep breath so I wouldn't break. "I'm here, my child. I'm here." I wanted to tell her to come to stay with me, that this humble corner was more of a home than that house with cold walls. But I didn't say anything. I just listened to her. I just held her from the other side of the line, because sometimes that's already a miracle. I hung up with my soul hanging by a thread. I got up, opened the window, and looked at the sky. I asked my husband to take care of her, to whisper in her ear that she's not alone, that even though her house has become a war zone, she has a place to take refuge. I looked at my bed and thought there's room for her. I promised myself that if one day she knocks on the door, I will receive her with open arms and a boiling kettle. Because if I have anything left, it's love. Love that I will no longer give where it's not valued, but that will always be ready for whoever truly needs it. And you, how far would you let a daughter-in-law humiliate your mother? Is a son's silence also a betrayal? Tell me in the comments below. I read you with an open heart. I got up later that morning. Not because I had slept better, but because my body asked me to rest. Sometimes the soul gets so tired that it drags the body with it. I made myself a coffee and drank it in front of the old dresser mirror that Lucy had placed in my room. I hadn't looked at myself head-on for months, perhaps years. I always avoided mirrors, because a woman like me who has given, who has supported, who has given up, often forgets what she looks like. But that morning, I did it. I sat down and looked at myself, and I felt pain, because there I was with a fallen face, deep wrinkles, hair more white than gray. But also, there was something firm in my eyes, a kind of discreet fire. It wasn't easy to hold my own gaze, because in doing so, I had to admit that I had been missing inside myself for a long time. I saw my dark circles, my dry cheeks, my colorless lips, but I didn't feel pity. I felt anger, not towards anyone, towards myself, for having neglected myself for so long, for having prioritized everything but me, for having always provided the clean towel, the hot meal, the quick hug without ever asking what I needed. I touched my neck tenderly and felt the loose skin. I remembered when I was young, when my husband said I had the most beautiful hands he had ever seen. Today, they are full of lines, but they are still strong. They can still hold. I opened the closet to look for something comfortable and found an old box I had forgotten about. Inside were some clothes I had kept from my time as a full-time seamstress, and there, among the wrinkled fabrics, a white dress appeared. A wedding dress. I recognized it instantly. I made it for a girl from the neighborhood who in the end didn't get married. She returned it to me crying, and I kept it without knowing why. I took it out carefully, as if it were made of glass. The stitches were still firm, the lace yellowish but intact. I hung it in the window to air it out, and I sat in front of it as if it were speaking to me. I thought about how symbolic it was. A dress that was made to celebrate love and ended up stored away because of sadness. Wasn't that a reflection of my life? Of how many illusions I embroidered for others to wear without even a thank you? I kept looking at the fall of the fabric, the delicate shape of the neckline, the small embroideries I made with such care. And I felt that this dress represented me, something forgotten, something unused, something that others rejected, but that still retained beauty. I stood up, I touched it, and I decided that I was going to restore it. I took out my threads, cleaned the table, and prepared to sew, not for work, not out of obligation, for me, because that act, reconstructing that dress, was also a way of reconstructing myself. I put on my glasses, cut a piece of fabric, and felt an emotion I hadn't felt in a long time. Every stitch was a sigh, every seam a caress. As I did it, I thought of all the women who, like me, forgot themselves while weaving the lives of others. And I wanted to believe that maybe, when I finished it, something in me would also be ready to bloom again. Lucy came into the room and stood silently watching what I was doing. "It's beautiful," she said, "more than before." I nodded without saying anything, because I knew she wasn't just talking about the dress. She offered me a glass of water and sat with me. I told her the story of that bride who didn't make it to the altar, and she told me something that marked me. Sometimes not arriving on time is the only way not to get lost. I didn't know what to answer, but her words hung on me like a thread in a needle, because yes, maybe leaving that house was finally arriving at my place. The hours passed without me realizing it. The light came through the window and gave the dress a faint, almost magical glow. Not the magic of fairy tales, but a real one. One of those that you only get when a woman decides to mend herself. I looked at myself in the mirror again, and this time I liked myself a little. I saw a tired woman, yes, but alive, whole, capable. I fixed my hair. I put on a little blush, and I thought, I'm not as finished as they made me feel. The night surprised me with sore fingers, but a light soul. I put my things away. I covered the dress with a white sheet and sat on the bed. I took a deep breath and felt that something had been released, as if an old guilt had gone out the window. I lay down, and before closing my eyes, I promised myself that I would not hide again. Not in houses that do not belong to me, not in silences that do not protect me, not in mirrors that I dare not look at. Because this version of me, the one that embroiders, the one that hurts, the one that resists, also deserves to be loved. And not by others, by me. That day I woke up with a strange emptiness, as if something was calling me from within. It wasn't sadness, it was urgency, like when you have to let out your breath all at once, because if you don't, you'll suffocate. I made coffee and sat at the table with my hardcover notebook. one that I had kept for years and never used for fear of ruining it with nonsense. But that day, I didn't care. I opened it, I took a blue pen, and without thinking too much, I wrote on the first page, "For you, Julian." And I began. I began like someone pulling out a thorn, slowly but without stopping. I told him things I never said, that it hurt not to hear a thank you, and that I never expected a monument but a gesture, a look, a shared coffee without complaints. I told him that some nights I stayed up waiting to hear his key in the door, and that when he arrived, he just walked past. I told him I was happy raising him, but that there were days when I wanted to disappear from so much exhaustion. That he was my engine, yes, but also my greatest sacrifice. And that if I ever seemed controlling it was because I didn't know how to be a mother without being on top of things. Because no one taught me to let go. The pen glided as if it weren't mine. As if my body was finally releasing what it had kept silent for so long. I wrote that I never hated Monica. That at first I even liked her. That she seemed polite, strong, confident, but that little by little she erased me. She snuffed me out like a candle that gets in the way on the table, that I tried to understand her, to please her, to not bother her. But that there comes a point where the soul gets tired of asking for permission to exist. I wrote that I didn't leave because of anger, that I left because I could no longer stand up amidst so much contempt disguised as modernity. I finished the first letter and stared at the paper. I was shaking, not from fear, from relief. It was as if I had lifted a sack from my chest, but I didn't stop there. I started another one, and then another. One spoke of Sundays of the empty table, another of how I missed seeing his clothes hanging in the yard. Another shorter just said, "Your silence hurt me more than your shout." There was so much accumulated, so many shapeless wounds, that each page became a kind of makeshift bandage. Not for him to read, but for me to be able to breathe. I put the letters in a large envelope. I tied them with a red ribbon, and I hid them in the top of the closet where I also keep my wedding photos and a handkerchief my mother gave me before she died. I don't know why I did that, maybe because I needed to give my pain a concrete place, something I could touch, move, store, as if it would hurt less that way, as if having the pain folded and tied up was more bearable than leaving it loose around the house. Lucy noticed that I was quieter than usual. She asked me if I was feeling unwell. I told her no, that I was emptying myself. "Sometimes you have to make space inside," I murmured. She nodded without asking more, and I appreciated that. Because you don't always need comfort. Sometimes you just need someone to sit nearby while you do what you have to do. I didn't have dinner that night, but I slept better, much better. The next day I lit one of the letters and burned it in the sink. I watched the paper consume itself slowly, leaving gray ash and a faint smell of farewell. I watched the fire extinguish itself, and I said in a low voice, "What is not said also rots inside." And I decided that I was not going to let anything rot in me anymore. That every unsaid thing, every silent pain, I was going to write it. I was going to cry it. I was going to burn it if necessary, but I was not going to be silent anymore, at least not with myself. I went back to my room, opened the closet, and caressed the remaining letters. I whispered to them, "I don't know if I'll ever give them to you, but thank you for listening to me." I sat on the bed, opened the notebook again, and I started writing a letter to myself, to the woman I was, to the woman I am, to the woman I am beginning to know. Sometimes you don't have to do anything for things to fall under their own weight. You just have to leave an empty space, and wait. I learned that unintentionally in silence while I continued with my sewing and my new routine. I didn't find out on my own, but through Lucy, who always runs into someone in the square or at the market and finds out what I don't want to ask. That morning she arrived agitated with a smile she tried to hide without success. She sat down to have coffee with me and blurted out almost like someone throwing a stone into a river. I ran into Maria and she told me something you're going to like. The word like wasn't the right one, but I understood what she meant. I remained silent, waiting. Lucy adjusted her shawl, took a sip of coffee and lowered her voice. She says she saw Monica on the street and they crossed paths right in front of the bakery. She greeted her politely as always, and Monica barely responded. I didn't say anything. I could already imagine that scene. But the funny thing, Lucy continued, is that after a few seconds of silence, Maria couldn't help but ask her, "And is your mother-in-law still living with you?" I stopped there. I stared at the steam from the coffee rising like an answer I didn't want to hear. Lucy smiled with the corner of her lips like someone who knows that what she's about to say has an edge. And Monica, with that superior look you already know, answered something like, "She decided to leave. It was about time." I raised an eyebrow involuntarily, but Lucy wasn't finished. And then Maria looked at her straight in the eye and said, "Oh, really? That's strange. We all thought that house was hers." I froze there, not because of the phrase itself, but because for the first time someone else said out loud what I had been keeping silent for years. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't mockery, it was justice. Small, everyday justice without scandal. And it hurt. Not for me, for Monica. Because I knew that comment had gotten under her skin like a needle. Because there are truths that hurt more when a third party says them. I imagined her there, standing in the middle of the street with her expensive bag, her perfect hair and that phrase turning over in her head. We all thought that house was hers. Finally someone else saw her as I always saw her, hard controlling, afraid that someone would dismantle her version of the story. Lucy looked at me. She asked me if I was okay. I nodded, but inside me there was a strange mixture. Not joy, not sadness either. It was something else, a kind of rest, as if the air had cleared after a long storm, as if without saying a single word I had also spoken. I remained silent for a good while. Then I got up, took the box of fabrics that I had half sorted, and began to fold them one by one. I felt my fingers firm, my back straight, and my heart calm, for the first time in a long time. That night, while embroidering a napkin with gold thread, I thought about how the world turns without you pushing it, how the pieces fall into place when you step aside. I thought about Julian. Had Monica told him what happened? Had she told him that someone questioned her role, or would he still believe that everything was under control? I imagined him coming home finding his wife colder, more tense, more cutting. Because when a woman like Monica feels exposed, she doesn't shout. She punishes in silence, and that silence wouldn't last long. I went to bed early with the window ajar. A gentle breeze came in, and I could hear the distant echo of a television on. I covered myself with a light blanket and said to myself, this is just the beginning. Because when someone lives for so long pretending to control everything, the first collapse isn't noticeable on the outside. It's noticeable in the eyes, in the way they answer, in the nights they don't sleep. I didn't need to see her. I knew. I knew her face had changed. That she could no longer hold on to the story she had invented with the same firmness. And without meaning to, without looking for it, without raising my voice, I was gaining ground. But not a ground of power, no, a more important one. That of my value, that of my right to be seen, to be recognized. Because there is no more certain punishment than the one that comes when you are no longer there to justify it. I fell asleep with that thought in my chest, like someone tucking in a truth and letting it rest with them. I don't know how to describe what I felt when I saw her there at the entrance of the building, with her hair disheveled, her backpack hanging from her shoulder, and her eyes red. It was my granddaughter, my little girl, only 13 years old and already carrying a sadness that didn't belong to her. I stood paralyzed for a second. I thought it was a dream, that my mind was playing a cruel joke on me. But no, there she was, shaking, breathing in short gasps. Saying in a broken voice, "I couldn't take it anymore, Grandma. I ran away." I approached slowly, as if the slightest movement could make her crumble. I hugged her, and feeling her fragile body, I knew she was more broken than I imagined. We went inside without speaking. All you could hear were her soft sobs and my keys jingling at the door. Lucy was in her room and didn't ask anything, as if she sensed that this night was not hers. I sat my granddaughter on the bed, made her tea with honey, carefully took off her shoes, and offered her a blanket. She looked at me with wide eyes, as if she couldn't believe she was there. I stroked her hair and couldn't help but wonder how we had reached this point. How was it possible that this child whom I saw being born was seeking refuge in my room in secret as if she were a delinquent? She didn't give me many details. She just said that her parents wouldn't stop fighting, that Monica yelled all the time, that Julian locked himself up to work, that no one listened to her, that the food didn't taste like anything anymore, that her stomach ached from holding it all in. I remained silent, holding back tears. Because I already knew all of that. I sensed it. But hearing it from her mouth was like a slap in the face. And the worst part is that I was also part of that environment. I also kept quiet, so as not to make things uncomfortable, so as not to provoke, so as not to make things worse. And in the meantime, she was growing up surrounded by a silent war. "Can I stay here, Grandma?" That question broke me, not because of the request, but because of the way she made it, with fear, like someone asking for permission to exist. I took her hands and told her the only thing I could say from the bottom of my soul. "You don't have to ask for permission to seek refuge here." She hugged me so tight that tears streamed down my face without my wanting them to. I wrapped her in my arms like when she was little, like when she would fall and run to me for comfort. And I understood in that moment that there are things that don't undo with time, that true love is not defeated, it just waits in silence to be called. That night she slept with me, holding me as if she were 5 years old again. She fell fast asleep in minutes. I didn't. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, grateful and broken at the same time, thinking about everything that little girl had had to swallow, about everything she had to carry without understanding why. I thought about Julian. I thought about how far he had gone from everything he once was, how he had allowed his house to become a minefield, and I wondered if in some corner of his conscience he still recognized me as the woman who held him when he himself was just a scared little boy. At dawn, she was still asleep with her fists clenched and her breathing calm. I got up slowly, made coffee, and sat by the window to watch the city wake up. The sky was clear, and I could hear the bells of a nearby church. I thought about calling Julian, about telling him his daughter was with me, but something inside me stopped me. It wasn't the right time. She needed peace, and if she could only find that peace with me, then so be it. For now, it was enough for me to know that she didn't feel alone that night, that she didn't have dinner amidst shouting, that she didn't fall asleep in fear. She woke up mid-morning, and I made her bread with chocolate. She ate it in silence, as if her body was reminding her that she could relax. "Can I stay another day?" she asked me. "As many as you need," I replied. She smiled at me, a small smile barely visible, but enough to fill my chest, because I understood that maybe this girl was going to remember this stage of her life, not for the pain, but for this corner where she could finally breathe. Later, when she went out onto the balcony, I saw her looking at the birds with an expression I didn't recognize, and I thought sometimes we can't save everyone, but we can be the place where someone saves themselves. And with that, I was content, more than with any apology, more than with any reparation. And you should a grandmother intervene when her grandchildren are suffering at home? Or is it better to keep quiet so as not to make things worse? Leave me your opinion below. I read you with an open heart and very attentive eyes. That morning I set 3 plates on the table. It wasn't something planned, it was a natural reaction. The habit of many years would have made me set 2, but that time I felt that there were 3 of us. Lucy, my granddaughter, and me. A woman who opened her home to me without conditions. A child who sought refuge without knowing that she was also coming to save me. And I in the middle like a bridge that makes sense again. I put out bread-cut fruit and served coffee. And when I saw my granddaughter come out of her room with her eyes still swollen but her back straighter, I felt something in me settle. Lucy came in with her dragging sandals and a flowered robe. She brought a guava jam she had bought at the market. "Today we have a proper breakfast," she said. My granddaughter smiled a small smile, but she smiled. The 3 of us sat down, and there was a long, very long moment in which no one spoke. We just ate, calmly, chewing without rushing, as if that breakfast were a secret ceremony, as if every bite said, "You are safe." And in that silence, I realized that a table is not filled with plates, it is filled with relief. And there, in that modest corner, life began to beat again. After breakfast, Lucy went to do some shopping and we were left alone. My granddaughter helped me clean fold clothes and water the plants. I showed her how to cut the thread without twisting the needle, how to thread it without her hand shaking. She listened to me with that tension that children have when something makes them feel part of something important. Sometimes she would look at me without saying anything, as if she wanted to ask me things she didn't dare to yet. And I didn't pressure her. I knew that everything would come out when it was ready. I just wanted her to know that she didn't have to hide here. In the afternoon, we sat down to watch a movie. Lucy came back with freshly baked cookies. The apartment smelled of butter and vanilla, of home, of those homes that don't appear in magazines, but where the soul can finally sit without fear. And I there, surrounded by two women who asked for nothing more than presence, understood that not all families are broken by betrayal. Some are rebuilt in silence, with new bonds, with tenderness, woven without hurry. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilty for being okay, for not being there, for not running to fix what others destroyed. My granddaughter asked to sleep over another night. I prepared her bed with clean sheets and the teddy bear she still had from when she was little. I hugged it before putting it on her pillow. She received it without saying anything, but her eyes watered. I approached, kissed her on the forehead, and whispered, "You don't have to be strong all the time here." She fell asleep in minutes, and I sat by her side for a while longer, watching her breathe, like when she was a baby, like when I still believed that my family was indestructible. At dusk, I went out onto the balcony for some air. The square was quiet. A couple of boys were playing guitar on a bench, and just when the sky turned that color between lilac and gray that I like so much, I heard a knock on the door. A firm knock, not a ring, a call. My body recognized it before my mind did. I froze. I didn't need to see to know who it was. I approached slowly without making a sound. And through the peephole I confirmed it. It was Julian, standing, waiting, holding something in his hand, as if he didn't know whether to knock again or leave. I didn't open. I couldn't. I didn't know if it was anger, fear, or simply that peace that had cost me so much to have again. I stayed there behind the door, holding my breath, feeling my heart beat in my temples. I heard his footsteps walking away. Then silence. I closed my eyes and rested my forehead against the wood. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I just thought. Sometimes staying still is also an answer. And that night I slept with a tight chest but a straight back. That morning I dreamed of him, of my husband, of the only man who looked at me as if I were worth more than the whole world. We were in the old house, the one from when Julian was just a child. He was in the kitchen frying eggs, and he asked me if I had forgiven myself yet. I woke up sweating with a lump in my throat. I didn't know if it was because of the question or because deep down I hadn't asked myself that yet. I sat on the bed with the blanket over my legs, staring into space as if waiting for a sign, anything, whatever it was. But nothing came, just silence. After breakfast, Lucy went out with my granddaughter to buy some things for school. I was left alone at home. I opened the trunk I had brought from the other apartment and took out a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were the letters my husband wrote to me when he worked away Julian's childhood drawings, a gold chain with the pendant I never took off while he was alive. I also took out an old blanket, one of those that smells of history. I put it on my shoulders and sat in the armchair closest to the window. And there, in that stillness, I felt I had to talk, not with anyone, with him. I didn't speak out loud. I thought it, I felt it, as if he were there right beside me. I told him I missed him, that it was costing me more than I imagined, that it hurt to have failed in the one thing I promised to protect, our family. I told him Julian threw me out, that he yelled at me, that he kicked me out of the house we built together, and that he did it without hesitation. I told him I was afraid I had done something wrong, that sometimes I wonder if I raised a cold man, or if it was the world that made him that way. That I still love him, yes, but I don't know how to look at him without feeling like I failed myself. Before we continue, if this story is moving you and you want to keep following stories full of life, pain, and transformation, don't forget to subscribe to the Elderly Stories channel. Here, every story has a soul, and maybe one will help you heal something you didn't even know was still inside you. Click on subscribe and follow this path with us. I remembered his voice in the hospital, his hand in mine getting weaker and weaker. "Don't let him want for anything, Eleanor. Promise me." And I promised, with tears, with my soul, with every fiber of my body. But what happens when giving everything to a child means emptying yourself? What happens when that promise unintentionally becomes a curse? I stared at the walls, the crooked pictures, the still air, and I felt small. I felt like a traitor, not to him, to myself. I thought about the birthdays I organized alone, the times I sold my own things to pay for his tuition, how I managed to make the rice stretch when there wasn't even enough for meat. And yet, I raised him with love, with tenderness, with presence. I never left. I was never absent. So why did it hurt so much to feel like I failed? I closed my eyes and let the tears fall without a fight. Not those noisy tears. No, silent tears, the kind that wash you from the inside. Tears that only a woman who gave everything without asking can understand. I wrote his name on a blank sheet of paper. Just his name. Robert. And underneath a sentence I never dared to say. "Forgive me for still being here without you. Forgive me for not knowing how to let him go in time." I folded it and put it in the box along with everything I had left of him. I closed it carefully like someone closing a chapter. Not because it doesn't hurt anymore, but because I finally understood that continuing to live is also a way of honoring those who have gone. Later, while I was sweeping the living room, the phone rang. It was Julian. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care, but because I still couldn't find words that could come out without breaking me again. I just stared at the name on the screen and thought, I'm not ready. And maybe it's okay not to be. I sat down, took a deep breath, and repeated something I've started to believe. Not all mothers are eternal. Some also need to be daughters from time to time, to be cared for, to be seen. That night I went to bed early. My granddaughter was already asleep. Lucy was knitting in silence, and I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine a future that didn't hurt. One where not everything I do has to be for others. One where I also fit even if it's on the last page. Lucy woke me up with a whisper. She was in the kitchen talking on the phone in a low voice, but her tone was different. Like when you don't want to say something too loudly so as not to scare someone. I got up slowly, put on my robe, and waited for her to hang up. She looked at me with a strange mixture of sadness and something like pity. I didn't want to tell you, but you're going to find out anyway. I already knew something was coming. My body knew it. It seems they're going to repossess Julian's car. He's behind on payments, way behind, and not only that. They say he's in debt everywhere, that no one wants to extend him credit anymore. I didn't say anything. I just sat at the table and breathed, deeply, very deeply. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't happy. It didn't hurt. It was like watching a dry branch fall, like an inevitable result of years of pretense, because it's one thing to stumble and another to live believing that others will always save you. I thought about everything I paid for without saying it. The bills that appeared as if by magic, the receipts that disappeared, the car insurance, the restaurant outings, the internet, the groceries, the bottled water that Monica drank as if it were expensive wine. All of that came from my account, from my back, from my sacrifices. And now that I was gone, the stage was collapsing. Lucy told me that Monica went to the bank to complain, that she made a scene, that she demanded to speak to a manager, but there was no manager who could explain what she didn't want to accept. The card was never hers, the account neither, that money doesn't grow on trees, that living as if everything is guaranteed has an expiration date. I imagined her leaving the bank with a hard face, firm steps, and inside torn to shreds. I imagined Julian receiving the collection calls, lowering his head, avoiding telling the truth. Because how do you say out loud that you lost your footing because you forgot who was holding you up? That afternoon, I sat on the balcony with my notebook and wrote a single sentence. There are debts, that are not paid with money." I repeated it several times because it was true, because there was another debt, more silent, more painful, that of respect, that of affection taken for granted, that of a presence believed to be guaranteed. I thought of all the times Julian called me just to ask for something, never to know how I was, never to offer a coffee, never to ask if I needed anything. And now he lacked everything. Everything cost him. And I wasn't there. I didn't enjoy it. But I didn't blame myself either, because understanding limits is not cruelty. It's justice. It's learning. And sometimes when life tells you that's enough, it's not punishment, it's redemption. Lucy was looking at me out of the corner of her eye, as if she expected me to say something. But I said nothing. Because there are silences that are worth more than 1,000 speeches. Because if I've learned anything, it's that you don't always have to explain why you're leaving. Sometimes it's enough not to come back. It rained hard that night. The thunder shook the windows and the air smelled of wet earth. My granddaughter got scared and came to my bed. She snuggled up next to me, and I sang her the same song I used to sing to Julian as a baby. "Sleep now, for the moon is watching you." And as I rocked her, I thought about how love doesn't end. It just changes direction. That now my tenderness was not for those who despised it, but for those who could still grow in it. The next day I saw a tow truck through the window. I didn't know why, but something pushed me to look closer. And then I saw it. It was Julian's car, the same one he always bragged about, the same one he said was his. They were towing it away. 2 men were talking to each other while making signs. Julian was standing next to it with his hands in his pockets, not saying a word. I recognized him from behind. That gesture, that weight on his shoulders, I had known it since he was a child. But I didn't go out. I didn't go down. I didn't say anything. I watched him from above, like someone looking at an old version of something that no longer is. I stood still, watching the car being pulled away by the tow hook, and I told myself something I had been chewing on for days. Maybe there is no worse debt than forgetting the one who gave you everything unconditionally. I closed the curtain. I poured myself a coffee, and I promised myself that no matter how much it hurts, I would not rescue anyone who doesn't know how to swim on their own again. Lucy arrived that day with her eyes lit up. She had gone to the market as always, but on the way, she ran into someone who used to be my neighbor. She told me while she was making coffee, "Monica wants to sell the house." I stood motionless, not out of surprise, but out of indignation. Sell the house, my house, the house I built with every stitch, every sleepless night, every bill paid in installments, the house where Julian learned to walk, where his father died. How dare they? I didn't say anything at that moment. I just felt the bitter coffee on my tongue, like a reminder that there are things you don't forgive, even if you learn to let go. I was left with that sentence stuck in the back of my neck all day. I imagined Monica sitting in the living room with her computer open, browsing real estate websites, writing things like "well-located house with family history." And my blood boiled, because that house wasn't just a space. It was my sacrifice made into walls. It was the place where I loved, suffered, raised, healed, lost. And now they wanted to sell it like a secondhand bag. I sat on the bed and opened my folder of documents. Everything was still there. The original deed, the receipt for the last property tax payment, the document signed by my husband. Everything. In order. Everything. In my name. I thought about going to the house, about standing in front of Monica and telling her to her face that she couldn't sell what was never hers. But something in me no longer needed to shout. Not anymore. What I had to say the paper said. The history said it. The silence with which I left said it. Because sometimes, when a woman leaves with dignity, what she leaves behind begins to crumble on its own. There was no need to argue. It was enough to wait. Wait for them to realize that you can't live comfortably on what you despised. Lucy told me that Julian found the papers, that he sat on the couch without speaking with the deed in his hand, that Monica got angry, that they argued, that he told her it was never ours. And there, I felt a sweet pang. Not because of the anger it caused, but because of the recognition. Because sometimes the only thing a mother needs is not for them to ask for forgiveness, but for them to tell the truth, even if it's late. It was never ours. It was true. And hearing, even if it was from someone else's mouth, that he said it was like getting back something that was taken from me without permission. I wondered what that house would look like now, if the curtains I sewed by hand were still hanging, if the kitchen still smelled of cumin and cinnamon like before, if my presence was still felt in the walls even though I was no longer there, because there are houses that have memories, that keep the echo of the steps that gave them meaning. It hurt me to think of it as an object for sale, but I also understood something. A house ceases to be a home the exact moment you are forced to leave, and from that day on, I no longer lived there. My granddaughter hugged me that night without saying anything. Maybe she sensed it. Maybe she felt the tension in my body that I was trying to hide. I stroked her hair and said softly, "Valuable things are not sold, they are honored." She didn't fully understand, but she nodded. And that was enough for me, because if anyone is going to inherit something from me, I don't want it to be furniture or walls. I want it to be the memory of a woman who knew when to stay and when to leave. I sat at the table with my notebook and wrote a single line. "You don't sell what was built with love and inhabited with pain." That house can change owners. Yes, they can paint it, they can remodel it, but they will never make it theirs, because there are spaces that recognize their true owners. And if one day Monica hears how the doors creak, how the light doesn't come in the same way, let her know that it's not a fantasy. It's history. It's absence with a name and a surname. That night I fell asleep looking at the ceiling without tears, without anger. With a single certainty, I no longer live in that house. But that house will never be able to forget me. That day I woke up with a strange calm, the kind that comes after a long storm. I started sorting the box of fabrics I had half classified, and without thinking, I took out the dress, the same one I had found weeks ago, hanging like a broken promise. I spread it out on the table and ran my hand over each seam. The lace was intact. The embroidered pearls were still firm. I looked at it with different eyes, no longer as a forgotten garment, but as a witness, a survivor. Something that, like me, had not had the ending for which it was created, but that still had value. I sat in front of it and started working. Every stitch was a conversation with myself, every mending a reconciliation with the woman I was. It wasn't just a dress, it was a mirror. I embroidered with soft-toned threads, adjusted the waist, reinforced the sleeves. I lost myself in that process, as if time had stopped. When I finished, I hung it in the window to catch the daylight. And there, suspended in front of the sun, the dress seemed to breathe, as if it were saying, "I'm still here." As if its beauty didn't need an altar, but a look that values it. Lucy came in and was speechless. She just murmured, "It's alive." I smiled, not out of vanity, but out of gratitude, because there was something in that piece that spoke for me, that said everything I didn't dare to put into words. I didn't give up. That same afternoon, a young woman knocked on the door. She came on the recommendation of someone who knew Lucy. "They told me that you know how to sew like in the old days, that you fix dresses with history." I nodded. She had hers wrapped in plastic new, but without a sole. I showed her mine not to sell it, just to share. She looked at it with wide eyes and asked, "And this one, whose was it?" I thought for a second, and I told her, "It was mine, although I never wore it." We remained in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was one of those silences that listen more than words. The young woman asked to try it on. I helped her put it on carefully, and when she looked at herself in the mirror, she cried. Not from sadness, from recognition. "It fits me as if it had known me before," she whispered. I also had to bite my lip so as not to break down, because that sentence was like a caress to all my invisible years. Because yes, maybe that dress wasn't for me, but today it spoke for me. She wanted to buy it. She wanted to pay for it with a generous sum, but I didn't sell it. I told her the price was that she wouldn't forget it, that she would know it was sewn with old love, with hands that didn't seek fame, but repair. She hugged me tightly, as if she had found something more than a garment, and as she left, I knew that something of mine had also gone with her, not to be lost, to be reborn in another body, in another beginning. That night I left the window open. A warm breeze came in like a new promise. I went to bed in peace. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel resentment. I felt repaired. Not from Julian, nor from Monica, from life. Because sometimes the love you planted in barren soil blooms in another garden. It came when I least expected it. I was folding clothes. I had put on soft music, one of those old trio songs that spoke of quiet goodbyes. My granddaughter was taking a nap and Lucy had gone out for bread. Everything was calm. Everything. Until the phone vibrated. I looked at the screen without rushing, thinking it would be a random notification. But no, it was him, John. And the worst part wasn't reading his name. It was seeing the message. "Can we talk? I'm confused. I miss you." I stared at the text with my stomach in knots. It was short, harmless in appearance, but loaded with everything he never said. My fingers trembled, not because I wanted to answer, but because something in me stirred. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was a confusing mixture of anger, pity, and something like old tenderness, the kind you don't know if you should feel. I sat down. I breathed. I read the message again, and again, and again, as if I were looking for a secret key, a hidden intention. But there were only those words, enough to stir up everything I had managed to put in order. I thought about answering him. Just one line, something cold, something dignified, something like, "Now is not the time." But I didn't, because I knew that if I wrote one word, just one, the floodgates would open. And I'm not ready. Not yet. Not after what happened. Not after all the silence. Because a message doesn't erase an expulsion. It doesn't heal humiliation. It doesn't rebuild the trust that he himself trampled on. I got up, left the phone on the table, and went to the balcony. I needed air. I needed distance. Because the heart is foolish. The heart wants to go back. But the soul no longer does. From the balcony, I saw an elderly couple pass by holding hands. They walked slowly, without rushing, with that complicity that is built only when everything has been shared, the good, the bad, the unsaid. And I thought, that's what I wanted to leave to Julian, a model, an example, a story. But he chose something else. He chose the comfort of control, comfortable contempt. And now that the house is falling down on him, he writes, because sometimes men don't seek out their mothers when they love them, but when they need them. I went back to the room. I turned off the music. I sat in front of the dress I had left hanging in the corner, the same one that no longer belonged to me, but that continued to speak to me. And there, in that silence, I understood something. Love is not begged for, nor is it recycled. What he feels, if he feels anything, he will have to prove without words, with actions, with time, with truth. And even so, I don't know if I want to see him. I deleted the message, without responding. I didn't block him. I didn't insult him. I didn't explain anything. Because if I learned anything in these months, it's that not everything deserves a response. That sometimes the greatest act of self-love is silence. Not the one that punishes, the one that protects, the one that no longer kneels. I made myself a tea, and I sat by the window. Outside, the afternoon was falling, and a breeze moved the leaves on the balcony. Lucy came back with warm bread. My granddaughter woke up and came to hug me, and I there, amidst the aroma of the home I built, without permission, felt strong. Not invincible, not happy, but strong. Strong enough to leave that message without weight. Because not all reconciliations are necessary. Some simply arrive late. The afternoon was cloudy. The sky had that color between gray and pink that always reminds me of nostalgia. I had made rice pudding, and the aroma filled the apartment. My granddaughter was drawing at the table, Lucy was knitting in silence, and I was embroidering napkins as if sewing time. Everything was in its place, until someone knocked on the door. They didn't ring. They knocked, firmly, 3 times. I looked at Lucy. She got up first, but it was my granddaughter who said in a small voice, "It's her." And yes, it was her, Monica. Standing on the other side, alone, with no shadow of pride on her face. Lucy opened the door. I didn't. I remained standing firm with the thread still between my fingers. Monica came in as if she didn't know where to put her hands. She was wearing a wrinkled blouse, no makeup, and her hair was half up. You could see the dark circles under her eyes, the defeat, the discomfort. She looked at me, and there she stopped. She didn't say anything. She didn't cry. She didn't pretend. She just looked at me as she had never looked at me before, as if finally seeing what she always wanted to ignore. She sat on the edge of the nearest chair and lowered her head. I didn't speak. I waited, because now, after everything, the silence was mine. Long seconds passed, and then she said it, in a small, broken voice. You were right. I ruined everything. I felt a dull blow in my chest. Not because it surprised me, but because I didn't know if I wanted to hear it. Julian doesn't sleep. He doesn't eat. He doesn't know where to start. I heard her, but I didn't answer. We thought we could handle it all without you, that we were enough, that we didn't need anyone. She fell silent, swallowed. But the house without you became a cold, painful, hard place. And then, without warning, she knelt. Yes, she knelt. Not for show, not for theatrics. She knelt like someone who no longer knows what else to do, like someone who has no more excuses. I was cruel to you, and I have no right to ask for anything, but I'm here because I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore. And she cried. She cried like I had never seen her cry before, like I cried in silence all the times she ignored me. Each of her tears hurt me and freed me at the same time, not for revenge, for justice. I approached her, not to hug her, not to comfort her, to look at her, to see up close this woman who once kicked me out of my home. And seeing her like this, defeated, I thought. Even the hardest walls crack when they face their own loneliness. I offered her a napkin. She took it to her face without looking at me. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I didn't tell her I forgave her. I didn't tell her anything. I put my hand on her shoulder, and that was enough. Lucy brought water. My granddaughter stood silently watching from the hallway. I wondered what image would remain in her memory of this scene, and I wished from the bottom of my heart that she would learn this, that a woman doesn't need to shout to be right, that there are dignities that flourish in silence. Monica didn't stay long. She got up. She thanked me. She told me she didn't expect anything but that she needed to come, and before leaving, she turned one last time. Thank you for taking in my daughter. Thank you for not making her pay for what I did to you. And she left. I closed the door calmly. I leaned against the wood. I didn't cry. I just breathed. And I felt that something inside me finally was at rest. I don't know how I sensed it, but that morning I woke up with a tense calm, the kind of calm that announces that something is about to happen. I made coffee for myself and for Lucy, who was still asleep. The square in front of the building was quieter than usual. The light came in softly through the curtains, and my granddaughter was still sleeping as if the world couldn't touch her. I sat at the table with my notebook ready to write a little, but before I put pen to paper, I heard the doorbell. Once, then again, firm, clean. This time I wasn't mistaken. It was Julian. Lucy looked at me from the bedroom door. She didn't say anything. My granddaughter came out into the hallway, but I asked her with a look to go back. I didn't want her to see what still hurt. I took a deep breath. I walked to the door and opened it. There he was, my son, with his eyes downcast, his hands empty, his soul exposed. Can I come in? I nodded, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to, not for him, for me. He sat across from me at the table, the same table where I now have breakfast in peace, where I no longer feel invisible. He looked at me. It took him a while to speak, but when he did, there were no defenses, just one sentence. I know what we did, and there's no excuse. I listened to him in silence. He told me about the sleepless nights, about the tension with Monica, about his daughter crying, about the house feeling like a prison. I thought I was doing the right thing. Mom, I thought protecting my marriage meant pushing you away. My fingers trembled, but I hid them under the table. I'm not here to ask you to come back. I know I can't. I just want you to listen to me. And I did. Not for him, for me. Because I also needed to put words to the emptiness, to the cut, to the wound. I didn't leave you, Julian. You threw me out. He closed his eyes. And now I'm not the one who leaves. I don't leave where I'm wanted anymore. I'm staying, here, where I'm welcome, where I can breathe. His face broke, and I saw the child who once ran through the yard with his shoes on the wrong feet. But he was no longer in my arms. He was on the other side, an adult finally facing the weight of his decisions. Can we start over? I remained silent. I didn't know the answer. Maybe yes, maybe no. But what I did know with every cell of my body was this. I am no longer the one who begs. I am no longer the one who insists. I am no longer the one who leaves so as not to be an inconvenience. Now whoever doesn't value is left alone. We were silent for a long time. I got up. I served him coffee. It wasn't forgiveness. It was presence. It was what I could give him for now. He understood. And sometimes that's enough for something to begin to heal. A year passed. A whole year since that morning when I closed the door without looking back. Life has changed so much that sometimes I have trouble recognizing myself. I no longer live in fear. I no longer walk with tense shoulders or think twice before speaking. I'm still in the same apartment with Lucy, who has become a sister for life, and with my granddaughter, who now laughs more. She comes and goes. Sometimes she sleeps with me, other times with her dad. She has learned to decide, and that's already a victory. Julian is still trying to get closer, in his own way, with less long silences and cleaner looks. But there's no hurry. Not anymore. The house that was mine was sold, not by them, by my decision. Legal firm, serene. What I got from there, I used to start over, with my own name, without heavy surnames. I bought a modern sewing machine, a comfortable armchair, a table with 3 chairs, the ones I need. On the wall hangs the wedding dress I restored not as a relic, but as a flag. I look at it and it reminds me who I am, and who I will never stop being again. I still embroider, no longer out of obligation, for pleasure. Young girls come to learn with me. I teach them how to hold the needle, but also the soul. They look at me with clean eyes. They listen to me. And that is worth more than any feigned gesture from those who ignored me for years. Sometimes I cook cornbread like before, and the house smells of memory, but it doesn't hurt. Because this time, the aroma belongs to me. I don't have to beg anyone to value it. Whoever wants to stay, stays. Today, while I was watering the plants on the balcony, I saw Julian standing below. He didn't come up. He didn't shout. He didn't ask to come in. He just stood there with his hands in his pockets looking up. And for a second, I was the old me, the one who ran to the window, the one who opened the door, but not anymore. This time I closed the curtain, not with anger, with peace. Because I understood that not everything that touches your history deserves to touch your present again. I sat down with my cup of hot coffee. Outside the day was clear, inside me too. I looked around the living plants, the needles, in order my granddaughter asleep on the couch. And I thought I didn't get back what I lost. I built something else, something that doesn't depend on anyone's gratitude, something that is sustained in silence, in real affection, in quiet dignity. Because not all women want to go back to the past. Some of us. We choose to stay in the peace that cost us so much to conquer. And you also had to leave in silence from a place that you yourself built with love. If you were ever thrown out of a house you helped build, if you were told that you no longer decide anything, even though you were the one who held everything together for years, I want to tell you something from the bottom of this heart that has been hurt but never defeated. You are not a burden. You are not disposable. You are a root, a refuge. The soul that sustained entire generations with a single smile and a plate of hot food. Maybe today you feel forgotten, rejected. Maybe your son, your daughter-in-law, or someone you loved made you feel small. But listen to me, you were never a small thing. They were just small in gratitude. To you who cared even without being seen, who gave more than you had. I want you to know that there is still a lot of life to bloom in you. And yes, it is possible to smile again, even if it's in a smaller apartment with less noise and much more peace. Your dignity is not negotiable. And when a woman learns to stand on her own, she never again begs for a place where she was not loved. If this story touched your soul, subscribe to the Elderly Stories channel to continue hearing stories that heal. And tell me in the comments what part of this story hurt you and which one gave you strength. Subscribe to the channel and give it a like to discover stories that only a woman with scars can understand, secrets that have been dragged on for years, decisions that tear you apart, and truths that arrive when it's too late or just in time. Because there are wounds that only heal when someone dares to tell them.